The Beretta 92FS. You either love it, want to love it, or you're here to comment about people who love it. This thing was loved in the 90s. It's a very nostalgic piece. It's still produced by Beretta. This is the police special where you get like 3 magazines instead of just 2, but the only difference is that extra magazine. Other than that, this is basically the same as you'd get with a standard 92. So this thing's been used by the military under the as the M9. So, I mean, that alone gives a lot of people trust that this pistol can handle a lot of abuse, and it has. Under the military, it did see a lot of neglect and abuse, and some worked pretty good. Some pistols kind of broke down from neglect, and that's just kind of how mechanical objects work. And look at that, even the flies like it. Alright, so anyways, police have been using it for decades. You know, ever since it started, it was popular with police. It's very easy to shoot, even if you have small hands. Even though people complain about it having a really large grip, the grip isn't so large that people with small hands can't actually use it. The only thing they have to learn is how to manipulate the double action trigger in order to get good with it. So it definitely does encourage people to kind of give it a try when they learn about the history. For me, myself, I love this pistol because it just looks really good when it's worn. My first experience with it was in the military when I was issued one. I never shot one, but I was issued one. And when I shook it, I was able to get the safety to turn on and off just by shaking it. And when the hammer was back, if I shook it, the slide would go back about this far and hit the hammer. So that's how bad it was. And that's how that's how badly maintained they were. And so I didn't really have a frame of reference, and everything was just worn, and there really wasn't much finish left. And what was left looked like it had been chipped away. So it was just in real bad shape. The locking blocks would fall free from the barrel as soon as you disassembled it, so putting it back together was kind of trivial, and it was kind of annoying. But when I got out and I actually saw how 92s and M9s are supposed to be, I was kind of shocked. But, you know, I gave it a try, and I just fell in love with it. I was able to shoot it right out of the box really well. Not so the case with this specific pistol, because this thing had an abysmal trigger. I couldn't disassemble it without a tool. The recoil spring was ridiculously heavy to where pulling it back was just really tough. And it was just kind of a pain to get this thing to be functional and get it to where it's at. But it's 1,000 rounds in now, a little bit over 1,000 rounds in. And the trigger is amazing the way it's supposed to be. It racks very smooth now. It's disassembled easily now, as it should be. And the thing's like butter smooth. It's exactly the way it should be. So, you know, I'm pretty happy with this pistol. It's the second 92FS I've owned. But, I mean, by today's standards, the 92FS is pretty featureless. It has no accessory rail, so you can't mount a light or anything. There are some, like, grip modules that you could get that wrap around, and then they kind of give you something like where you can actually get some kind of over guard thing that wraps into the grip where you can mount a light as some weird odd little gadget or whatever. But it doesn't come with a rail on it. It has a milled in front sight to where you can't take it off unless you were to cut it off and maybe do some custom metal work where you can force sights to be put on there. There's no RDS cuts, though you can machine your own, and you just have to do some real surgery with it, which you wouldn't have to do on modern pistols. It's just a lot more investment. It comes with 15-round mags still. It's still relatively heavy and large because it's not made of polymer. It's made of aircraft aluminum and steel. So, and it's, you know, a relatively large gun at a 4.9-inch barrel and stuff. It's considered to have a fat grip, even though it's not the fattest that, you know, it could be. It's still considered fat because today there is no hump anymore. It is just a straight line down, and it is very thin, and it can work with pretty much anybody's hands. So, yeah. Not to mention that when it comes to the trigger, most of these guns have the D-spring, which is designed for double action only, which is kind of like how revolvers were, where they were a light double action because you were only ever shooting double action. You were rarely cocking it. So this is a heavy double action, like 10 pounds or so, whereas the D-spring brings it down to 6 or 7. and it's actually substantially lighter. You know, it feels substantially lighter than that at times. But if you lubricate it and you take care of it well and you break it in well, this trigger does not feel like 10 pounds anymore. It actually feels pretty manageable. It's not all that bad, unless you put gloves on. I've always had a little bit of a problem with gloves. But, you know, that's kind of it with the negatives. Now, the things that I liked about it, the safety here. If you're really into safeties and stuff and being able to safely decock, just turn the safety on, look at that. This little piece works independent of the firing pin, but this little piece strikes the firing pin. It goes through this little rotating safety bar right here, because this just goes straight across, and then the safety or the firing pin is right here, and you have the firing pin safety right here. So when you decock, it rolls out of the way, so you can, your hammer will never be able to strike it. Even if you were to pull the trigger and not go all the way, it would go into half cock. And even then, the firing pin's not being pulled. So the firing pin would actually have to get out of the way, like this. You would have to pull the trigger in order to get the firing pin to go forward. Alright, so it's a very good safety system. And of course, you can see that I converted that to with the G conversion kit, because that's just one of the things that I like to do with all my 92s. I'm okay with the standard safety, but I'm getting more serious at using this as a performance piece. So I'm gradually making like little small changes to modernize it, if you will. So, moving on, the other good thing is holsters are very easy to find and they're incredibly cheap. I was able to get a Blackhawk Epic holster, which is a level 3, for this pistol. It wouldn't really work all that well with like an M9 A1 or A3 or A4 or whatever. I think it would barely fit, but you'd have to adjust the tension, but it cost me 15 bucks. Yeah, so they're really cheap, really easy to find, and it's really easy to get into the market with a 92 because of how cheap parts are also. Because you can buy parts really cheap on eBay, like recoil springs, which is what you'll have to exchange out the most. Like between 5 and 10,000 rounds, you're going to have to change out recoil springs, depending on what you're shooting. I mostly shoot 124 grain NATO. I buy hot ammo all the time for 9mm, but, you know, that's me. I'm going to have to change out parts a little bit more frequently, but when it comes to, like, parts that are actually going to wear out on a Beretta, it's pretty much just the recoil springs and maybe the locking block down the road. But, you know, some people see it as a con that the locking block is kind of part of the barrel, but I would change out the barrel at the same time. That's just me. I think that it would be appropriate to do that maintenance package as a whole. And then you can change out little things here and there, like maybe you want to change out the springs for your safety, and maybe you want to change out the hammer spring too. So I have a lot of parts on hand, and I constantly have to use them. Like within the first month of dry firing, I broke a firing pin. This is not uncommon for me. I've broken Glock firing pins, I've broken M&Ps, FNs, HKs, SIGs, and all the big brands. I use them, and I use them seriously, and I practice with them, and I break them. That's just what happens. CZs happen a lot, and it's not really a big deal. I go through a lot of trigger return springs too. It's all good. But the one good thing about Beretta is they are behind their products, so they will take care of you as far as parts. And so I've never really had a problem with that. In fact, I got shipped a huge bag of trigger return springs when I told them like how much I worked with my 92s and my M9s and stuff like that, and how much I was actually shooting them. They just sent me a bag of like 5 trigger return springs. So they were actually very good at giving that kind of support. So what it all boils down to is if you're watching this video and you actually buy like a 92FS, it's because you really wanted it. Because at this point we're getting to that point where you actually have to kind of search for these over something like the 92X or the M9A4 or some of the more altered ones, we'll say, or more modernized ones, because those are getting more and more available, while these are kind of getting a little bit harder to find. Not necessarily, you can still find 92FSs relatively easy, but they're not going to be like you have to settle for a 92FS over like an M9A4. Like these are harder to find and harder to source than like the M9A4. Everybody wants to carry the M9A4 for whatever reason, or the 92X, and you know, some of the newer 92Xs that actually have the frame-mounted safeties and stuff. So anyways, the design has been upgraded over the years to improve reliability and modernize it a bit. So you can go with something like the 92X, which I believe would be ideal for today, but there's just something about sticking with the 92FS and just working with this thing, because in the past, people have been able to do good work with this original design, this tough, heavy double action. People have been able to do very good work with it. Even though I kind of gave up on the safety, people were still able to put it to good work and good use and maintain it and do a lot of good with it. So I like the challenge of actually getting myself to be able to perform to those standards today with, you know, a classic. That's just one of my draws. So let me know in the comments why you bought a 92FS, or why you're thinking of buying a 92FS, and what little draws, you know, what little things are drawing you to it.